Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Emily Ferrier, here to bring you through some of my favorite weird news stories from the past few days. For our first story, wanted urgently, people who know a half-century-old computer language so that the states can process unemployment claims. On top of ventilators, face masks, and healthcare workers, you can now add COBOL programmers to the list of what several states urgently need as they battle the coronavirus. In New Jersey, Governor Phil Murphy has put out a call for volunteers who know code in the decades-old computer programming language called COBOL, because computer programming, many of the systems still run on older mainframes. In Kansas, Governor Laura Kelly said that the state's Department of Labor was in the process of modernizing from COBOL, but then the virus interfered. So they're operating on really old stuff. That's a direct quote there. Connecticut has also admitted that it's struggling to process the large volume of unemployment claims with its 40-year-old system comprised of COBOL mainframe and 4 other separate systems. The state is working to develop a new benefit system with Maine, Rhode Island, Mississippi, and Oklahoma. But the system won't be finished before next year. So, way after the spike in unemployment. Literally, we have systems that are 40 plus years old. New Jersey Governor Murphy said over the weekend there'll be lots of postmortems, and one of them on our list will be, how did we get here when we literally needed COBOL programmers? For instance, with more than 362,000 New Jersey residences, I'm having a lot of trouble speaking because I just gave blood and I'm a little disoriented. I'm not going to lie to you. But, there we go. Also, subtle plug. Look at what a good person I am. No, but seriously, go give it. They're really in demand for it now. So with more than 362,000 New Jersey residents filing for unemployment in the past 2 weeks, the 40-year-old mainframes that process those claims are being overloaded. Coders have moved away from the aging language, which stands for Common Business-Oriented Language, a computer programming language that was developed back in 1959, according to the National Museum of American History. It's a programming language that was used to create very significant percentages of business systems over the period of the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s. Joseph Steinberg, an expert on cybersecurity, told this to CNN. But over time, coders have moved away from the aging language. The general population of COBOL programmers is generally much older than the average age of a coder. Steinberg says, many American universities have not taught this language in their computer science programs since the 1980s, and yet the program persists in systems despite a dwindling number of programmers for the language. A 2017 report by Reuters found that there are still 220 billion lines of this language used today. 43% of banking systems are built on COBOL, and 95% of ATM swipes rely on the code. Interesting. There's a little fun fact that I didn't know. Learning something new, am I right? Even the federal government, COBOL is being used in agencies such as the Department of Veteran Affairs, Department of Justice, and Social Security Administration, according to a 2016 report by the Government Accountability Office. A 2018 report by the Inspector General for the Social Security Administration found that the administration maintained more than 60 million lines of COBOL, with millions of more lines of other agency programming languages. The Inspector General urged the administration to modernize its systems. With more than 44,000 COVID cases in New Jersey, it's way more than that now, isn't it? The last thing the governor should have to worry about are computing systems, Steinberg, the cybersecurity expert, said. Governors should not have to think about the computer systems during a pandemic. We should have systems that, if there was an emergency situation, should not make the emergencies worse. I mean, I absolutely agree. I'd say that's pretty shocking, right? Anyway, we have one more little quick story I want to get through before we get to the break, because it's related to ATMs. Ontario businesses are taping debit machines to hockey sticks. Is that not the most Canadian thing you've ever heard? All across Ontario, people are finding ways to adapt to the physical distancing and isolation lifestyle. Some businesses have come up with creative ways to keep serving customers at a distance. Ontarians are fighting COVID with the most Canadian weapon possible, a hockey stick. Businesses have taken the hockey stick length rule quite literally. That is kind of the way that we're talking, sort of like how Florida is using an alligator. We Canadians are using a hockey stick. This has been using in drive-through windows, car windows, to pay, and gas stations as well, sticking to the hockey stick rule as diligently as possible. One man even shared a photo on Facebook of a hockey stick being used to pass a terminal at a Harvey's drive-thru in Kingston, Ontario. Harvey's is a burger chain. So that's happening at Harvey's and Dairy Queens throughout the country, apparently. Canada is also the home of caremongering trend that spread through the nation, encouraging people to support one another. Hotels have lit up with hearts to spread the love, heartwarming sidewalk chalk messages, encouraging people to stay positive. And the CN Tower in Toronto is lighting up every night with colorful show to brighten spirits across the six, as we call it. So times are hard, but patriotism and Canadianness is united, one hockey stick length at a time. Pretty hilarious stuff. Gotta love it. Oh, Canada. Oh, Canada. When we come back from the break, Stephen King has issued an apology. So we're going to talk about Stephen King when we return from the break. So don't go anywhere.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, welcome back. So before the break, we left off with a story about Canadians using hockey sticks to promote social distancing. I don't know why anybody would be shocked. And now, Stephen King is sorry if you've felt like you were stuck in a Stephen King novel. I think if anybody was questioning if I was actually Canadian or not, that me saying sorry just kind of did it for you. In his 1978 novel, The Stand, author Stephen King wrote about a viral pandemic that decimated the world's population. As he gets it, when his fans say experiencing the COVID outbreak feels like stepping into one of his horror stories, I keep having people say, gee, it's like we're living in a Stephen King story. And he says, my only response to that is, I'm sorry. A pandemic, like COVID-19, was bound to happen, King says. There was never any question that in our society where travel is the staple of daily life, that sooner or later there was going to be a virus that was going to communicate to the public at large. Though he made his name as a horror writer, King says he's most interested in exploring the intrusion of the unexpected and the strange in the lives of ordinary people. His new collection of short stories, If It Bleeds, centers on Holly Gibney, a private investigator who seems to have supernatural abilities. The character is featured in several other of his novels, including The Outsider, which he adapted into an HBO series. They're people who have those special type powers, King says of the character. People who can call me a horror writer if they want to, and that's fine as long as the checks don't bounce. I'm happy with that. But I think I do a lot more, and I'm interested in the mystery of what we are and what we're capable of doing. When asked about how the pandemic will leave a lasting mark on the current generation, King says, for me, as a guy who is in his 70s now, I can remember my mother talking about the Great Depression. It made a scar. It left trauma behind. And I think that my granddaughter, who can't see her friends and can only Skype them once in a while, and she's stuck in the house, when she's grown and her children say, oh my God, I'm so bored, I can't go out, my granddaughter is going to say, you should have been around in 2020 because we were stuck in the house for months at a time. We couldn't go out. We were scared of germs. It's an excellent point. Think about how we're going to tell our kids and grandkids, like, oh, you think this is bad? Well, obviously some of you have both of those things now, but for the future generations that haven't been alive yet or conscious, we're going to be like, hey, this isn't bored. It's a good point, Stephen King. Well done. Well played. When asked about how writing provides an escape from reality, he says, 20 hours a day, I live the same reality that everybody else lives in, but for 4 hours a day, things change. If you ever asked me how that happens or why it happens, I tell you that it's much a mystery to me as anybody else. In all the years I've been doing this, since I discovered the talent when I was 7 or 8 years old. I still feel much the same as I did in the early days, which is I'm going to leave the ordinary world for my own world. And it's wonderful, exhilarating experience, and I'm grateful to have it. When asked if he was thinking of rewriting in the year 2020 because of the pandemic, he said, I set the book I'm working on in the year 2020 because I thought, okay, when I publish it, if it's 2021, it'll be in the past and safely in the past. And then this thing came along and I immediately looked back through a copy I'd written, and I saw one of the things going on is that 2 of my characters had gone on a cruise, and I thought, now I don't think anybody's going to go on cruise ships this year. And I looked back on everything and immediately set the book in 2019 where people could congregate, be together, and the story would work because of that. Well, that's a good point. When asked how he's dealing with the fear and anxiety related to the pandemic, he said, on the short answer, I'm not. What I'm living in and what I suspect a lot of people are living in right now is cabin fever. But to be in the house day after day, all I can say is that I've made wonderful progress on a novel because there's really not too much to do, and it's a good way to get away from the fear. It's not panic. It's not terror that I feel, that I think most people feel. It's a kind of gnawing anxiety where you say to yourself, I shouldn't go out. If I do go out, I might catch this thing, or I might give it to somebody else. And when asked on the role of horror fiction in a period where the world is frightening, he says, well, they're like dreams, aren't they? You're able to go into the world that you know is not real, but if the artist is good, the filmmaker or the novelist or even the painter, for a little while you're able to believe that world because of the picture of it. The depiction is so real that you can go in there, and yet there's always a part of your mind that understands that it's not real. It's make-believe. That interview was conducted by Sam Berger and Moji Zadie. Pretty fun facts from Stephen King. Little interesting interview from Stephen King. So he acknowledges that we feel like we're living in a Stephen King novel, and he's sorry about it. It's kind of nice. All right, another little story, shall we? Face masks aren't mandatory everywhere, but strict rules on wearing them have been enforced by the Czech Republic, even for nudists. The European country has begun to relax restrictions imposed because of the coronavirus, but at the height of the concerns, like last month, police were called to remind people that it was okay to be naked in the designated public areas, but mouths needed to be covered. Czech law enforcers issued a warning after the officers were called out on March 27th in the small town east of Prague because there were complaints that maskless naturalists were basking in the warm weather. Unfortunately, many of the sunbathing citizens were gathered in large groups, and some were not wearing face masks, police said in a statement. Upon the arrival of the police, everyone agreed to respect the government regulation. We understand that many people do not have a garden and want to get some fresh air in the countryside, but we all have one common desire: to respect the government's guidelines so that the restrictions can be gradually lifted, the statement said. That, however, will not happen until everyone starts dutifully to respect the rules. It's very true. So if you're going to be naked, you wear that mask, right? You wear that mask. All right, we're going to take another break now. And when we return, we are going to talk about French police and who they've been turning away from their airports. So what's going on in France right now? And who's been trying to land there? Really? Why are there still planes flying? What's going on? Am I the only one sitting in my house? What's happening? All right, we're going to talk about that when we get back from the break. Leave.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hey, welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about mostly Stephen King and also nudists having to wear face masks. And now, French police turned back a private jet of holidaymakers from the UK. A group of would-be holidaymakers who flew in a private jet from London to France have been turned back by police. 7 men and 3 women arrived on the chartered aircraft to Marseille Province Airport, where helicopters were waiting to fly them to Cannes, where they'd rented a luxury villa. The men aged 40 to 50 and women aged 23 to 25. Just sounds like a movie that was made in Hollywood, doesn't it? Were refused permission to enter France and ordered by the police to fly back to the UK. They were coming for a holiday in Cannes. 3 of the helicopters were waiting on the tarmac. A border police spokesperson told the French press. French press is how I make my coffee in the morning. We notified them that they were not allowed to enter the national territory, and they left 4 hours later. Had to get a couple baguettes in there first, obviously. Once the Embraer Legacy jet had landed in Marseille Province, the group, made up of several nationalities, including Croatian, German, French, Romanian, and Ukrainian, reportedly tried to get help from contacts to continue their journey. They tried to make use of their connections, made a few phone calls, the source said. The helicopter pilots were told to return to their base, where they were fined for breaking French lockdown rules. The jet, chartered by Croatian businessmen, reportedly in finance and property, arrived last Saturday. Details were only released on Thursday. French police said that they would be carrying out strict checks on private aircrafts arriving in France over the Easter period. All non-essential travel inside France has been banned since the 17th of March. And a recent tightening of the restrictions means that anyone entering the country should hold an international travel certificate showing that the journey is essential. The authorities in France and Britain have made it clear that traveling to a second home in either country doesn't qualify as essential. Crossing borders needs legitimate or urgent reason. 9 of the jet passengers returned to the UK, and the 10th, a private jet to Berlin. In other news, a government agency in the U.S. state of Hawaii has reported an increase in the number of women reporting that landlords have been asking for sexual favors in exchange for rent. The Hawaii State Commission And the Status of Women noted that cases being reported suggesting that landlords are preying on tenants' financial stress during the pandemic. During the recent layoffs and furloughs, 69% of U.S. renters were able to make rent on April 1st. Oof, that is rough. Immigration attorney Kevin Block said instead of asking for rent, some landlords are asking for other arrangements, quote unquote, and even sending graphic sexual images when female tenants ask about rent. I'm concerned because reported incidents indicate a greater number of unreported incidents, Mr. Block said. Executive Director of the Hawaii Commission of the Status of Women, Kara Jabola Corrales, says the sexual harassment by landlords makes it harder for women to shelter in place. There was no plan up front to prepare for the physical and sexual violence from the combination of shelter in place, lost income, and systematic sexism, she says. We need to get the information on the rights and resources out as fast as we can. There is help. An online guide was actually created by the Hawaii State Commission for Women. If they are victimized by a landlord, the commission will offer guidance on the emergency rent assistance and will keep a database of bad landlords. Anyone victimized by a landlord should file a complaint. Normally, tenants would have 180 days to report the incident to the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission. Which takes jurisdiction unless it's federally funded entity. Since HCRC is closed due to the pandemic, victims are advised to contact Legal Aid Society of Hawaii. Ms. Jabola Corrales added, retaliation by a landlord for filing a complaint against him is illegal. If your landlord changes the locks or shuts off your utilities for complaining about his sexual predation, you can file a landlord-tenant TRO against your landlord, and the court will take these cases during this crisis. So if this has been happening to you, please contact Legal Aid Society of Hawaii for help with retaliation. There are no income limits for the help when it comes to fair housing matters. Yeah, that's absolutely horrible. Doesn't that disgust you? I mean, we've always known that there's always like that stereotype of landlords being quite, scummy and seedy and, just generally awful. But yeah, I think this kind of takes the cake. This is just general abuse. So if this has happened to you, make sure that you report it to the proper authorities, whether you're in Hawaii state or not, whatever state you are in. Make sure that you're reporting this because this is not okay. Okay, so we're going to have to take another break now. I was going to start another story, but I just don't have the time, and I want to give the story justice because it made me laugh. So we're going to talk about a couple of things when we come back. We're going to talk about one funny story that, if I say the title, is kind of going to give away the whole story. And then we're going to go into some schools that might be reopening. We're going to talk about why that happened, the logic behind that, why they're opening prematurely based on CDC recommendations. So why that's happening, and we're going to talk about that when we come back from the break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA, from the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and One Championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about some horrible landlords. And now, a driver was caught doing 130 miles per hour, claimed that he was trying to avoid the coronavirus. So that's not an excuse. Shouldn't have to say that. A motorist caught driving at 130 miles per hour claimed he was speeding to avoid catching the coronavirus, according to police. Surrey police stopped the driver on the M25 on Tuesday. This is in the UK. The force posted a tweet that read, "An officer stopped a driver who was speeding on the M25 at 130 miles per hour. His reply as to why he was speeding, he said, I thought if I went faster, the less chance I would have to catch the coronavirus." The driver reported to court. Police forces across the county have reported that some motorists are taking advantage of the quieter roads by driving at a high speed. Metropolitan Police revealed that this driver was caught speeding twice in 2 days in the same stretch of the A10 in Enfield with a 40 mile per hour limit. He was clocked doing 60 miles per hour on Monday and 67 on Tuesday. Some people just don't learn their lesson. Whoopsie doodles. And in what are we doing, guys? News. Florida Governor DeSantis mulls reopening because the coronavirus doesn't seem to threaten kids. So on Thursday, Governor DeSantis signaled that there was a possibility that Florida schools could reopen in May after being closed since March. We're going to look into the evidence and make a decision, DeSantis said, and the possibility of children returning to schools in the state, the Tampa Bay Times reported. If it's safe, we want kids to be in school. Even if it's for a couple of weeks, I think there's value in that, he said. This is why you just shouldn't listen to people, because this is just not true. So DeSantis added that he didn't think anybody under 25 had died of the virus. First of all, it's not true. Second of all, did you forget about teachers? Like, even if that was true. Okay. This particular pandemic is one where I don't think nationwide there's been a single fatality under 25 for whatever reason that doesn't seem to threaten the kids. If we lose in Florida between 5 and 10 kids a year from the flu, this one is much more dangerous if you're 65. Plus, no doubt about that, if you're younger, it just hasn't had an impact. So we should factor that in how we're viewing this. Again, do you know how kids go to school? You know that they have teachers, right? Not aware of that? Cool. This has been 100% consistent. I've not seen any deviation on that, he says. The governor's comments come close to the end of a 75-minute education roundtable on Thursday that featured teachers, parents, and government officials. The Florida Department of Education has been proactive in trying to continue the education of the state's kids during the closing, purchasing roughly 32,000 laptops for rural school districts that were unable to give the students the technology that they needed for virtual education. He added that Florida Virtual School has been offering kids free access to 100 online classes and has taken steps to be able to serve millions more school children if necessary. DeSantis also noted that a possible reopening would be approached in 2-week increments, and that some districts might need to stay closed depending if they have active concerns or not. It may be that not every county is going to be treated in the same as this, DeSantis said. Anthony Fauci, director at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, said on Tuesday that schools around the country should be able to resume in-person classes in the fall. Bottom line is, there's no absolute prediction, but I think we're going to be in good shape, the government's top infectious disease expert said. For the fall, I repeat, for the fall. Fauci, who's a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, noted that some measures would need to be put in place to prevent a resurgence of the virus. It's going to be different. Remember now, as this is not going to disappear, he said. So yeah, let's remember that. And one more story. Let's go for a short one. Gardaí are investigating after a man in North Dublin was pulling cars over using fake blue lights. It's understood that the man signaled the car to pull over at the Baldoyle area yesterday, which was being driven by a plainclothes police officer. Yeah, that's right. So a guy pretending to be a policeman pulled over a cop in plain clothes. Whoops. During a search of the car, a number of counterfeit items were seized, including a fake Garda badge. Honestly, I'm kind of impressed. That he was able to manufacture that. That can't have been easy, right? It's probably quite hard. I assume. I've never counterfeited something. It's fascinating. So no arrests have been made, and investigations are currently ongoing. In a statement, Garda headquarters said, on Thursday, the 9th of April, 2020, at approximately 3 p.m., Garda observed a car utilizing blue lights in the Baldoyle area. During a search of the car, a number of counterfeit items were seized by Garda. So, no arrests. And there you go. When we come back from the break, we have a sort of more normal one first. We have like a normal story coming up. And then we have like a real left field one later on that we actually might not get to, so I might do it in the next segment, but we'll see. We'll see how much time we have. There's a real weird one coming up. You're going to have to bear with me on that one because I found it weird, for sure. For sure. So we will talk to that. And some other stories when we come back. So don't go anywhere because there's still a lot to come. I mean, go, just do your thing. Go for a jog, but come back. So, yeah, coming up.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. All right, before the break, we were talking about an oopsie with the guy pretending to be a cop. And now, Liberty University President Jerry Falwell Jr. on Wednesday said that arrest warrants had been issued for reporters from the New York Times and ProPublica after both publications wrote stories criticizing his decision last month to partially reopen his Virginia-based college. Photos of the arrest warrants for the New York Times freelance photographer Julia Rendelman and ProPublica reporter Alec McGillis were published on the website of conservative radio host Todd Starnes. The warrant alleges each committed a misdemeanor for trespassing on campus when gathering information for their respective stories. Falwell's decision on March 24th to reopen the private Evangelical Christian University campus came nearly 2 weeks after Virginia Governor Ralph Northam issued a state of emergency. The university said that some students couldn't return home in an effort to protect elderly family members living under the same roof. Well, roughly 750 students were international students who couldn't return to their home countries. 5 days after the campus reopened, the New York Times reported that, according to the school's director of Student Health Services, nearly a dozen students had reported symptoms similar to those experienced in positive coronavirus cases. According to the school's website, no cases of the virus have been confirmed on campus. Liberty's website also denied the veracity of the Times reporting, calling it false and misleading. Dr. Thomas Epps, who was quoted in the Times story, denies that he ever told the reporter that Liberty had about a dozen students that were sick with symptoms that suggest COVID-19. Reads an article on the Liberty's website. He gave figures for testing and self-isolation that are consistent with Liberty's numbers, but New York Times preferred to go forward with a sensational clickbait that increases traffic. The university said that the reporters committed trespassing on posted property. The arrest warrants are issued by the magistrate based on the information derived from investigation conducted by Liberty University Police Department and the police agency with primary jurisdiction based on reports of criminal trespassing on a posted property made by Liberty University. The university told The Hill in an email. New York Times and ProPublica have stood by their reporting. Our freelance photographer was engaged in the most routine form of news gathering, taking pictures of a person who was interviewed for a news story, said the Times spokesperson, who was interviewed. To the Hill. We're disappointed that Liberty University would decide to make it into a criminal case and to go after a freelance journalist because officials were unhappy with the press coverage of the university's decision to convene classes in the midst of a pandemic. We have not heard from the university or any authority of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Dick Toffel, ProPublica president, told The Hill in regard to the arrest warrant. We also haven't heard anything from the university saying that there is anything wrong to the story. This is a he said, she said situation, isn't it? Don't know who to believe. We never do. Should we go for a little silly one to cleanse the palate? Why not? Burn patients clog the ICU beds, the precious ICU beds, thanks to a home cooking spike. Specialists at the Alfred Hospital have reported a surge in severe burns since the Victoria Stage 3 lockdown came into effect last month. Many of the injuries being treated in the hospital burns unit have been caused by hot oil, while others resulting from people cooking while intoxicated. Hands up if you're getting blotto out at your own home right now, being in a lock-in. I guess some people aren't alone. I'm alone. Sick. Associate Professor Heather Cleland, director of the Victorian Adults Burn Service at the Alfred, said the hospital had noted a significant increase in patients with severe cooking-related burns. We've seen burns from hot cooking oil catching fire, barbecue-related burns, and scald burns from hot liquids, Associate Professor Cleland said. The burns usually involve hands, arms, and faces. Frequently, people who are trying to deal with the burning of oil pick it up and try to take it outside, but what usually happens is the oil spills on them, or they fall and slip into a puddle of burning oil. Sometimes they open the back door and they get a big gust of air that makes the flames go even further. Associate Professor Cleland said that more than half the burns unit was filled with people who had sustained kitchen burns or domestic home cooking injuries. Several of those have also been in the intensive care unit. Be careful while you're cooking, all right? And one more little piece of news. Meth, illegal artifacts, and Baby Yoda on a date night. That's right. In Hays County, Texas, the Parks and Wildlife Department had a bit of fun. A couple of unique calls. From April 9th, a news release involves a date night with crystal meth, illegal digging, and Baby Yoda. The Hays County warden responded to San Marcos River Foundation property after receiving a photo from a game camera that showed a man and woman trespassing. The couple was digging on an archaeological Native American burial site on the property, and the warden found them in a hole previously dug by other trespassers. Before the warden could say anything to either person, he said a man hastily stood up and he said he wasn't digging for arrowheads and that he hates diggers. Later found out that the couple was on a date. The couple was detained and placed in the warden's vehicle, where the man admitted that he had a glass pipe in his pocket to smoke CBD oils. It was shaped like Baby Yoda, and it had a small, clear white crystals that looked like crystal meth. Warden spoke to the woman, who said that they had no idea that they were on private property, even though they walked past 2 no trespassing signs to get to where they were. Warden asked if they knew where the pipe went. After he was finished talking to the woman, the guy ditched the pipe. After further investigation, the warden saw freshly disturbed dirt and found the pipe inside. San Marcos police took the couple to Hays County Jail. On the way to the jail, the police said the man claimed he had coronavirus and leaned forward against the partition and aggressively coughed towards the officers. That's going to be a whole defense now, isn't it? Bizarre. Times are weird. Things are weird. It's all weird. We're going to take another break. When we come back, we're going to take a little trip to Italy. And we're going to discover some things that are being done to help Italy's food restrictions. We're going to talk about that when we get back from the break.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about some people being caught in compromising positions, kind of. And now, Mafia distributes food to Italy's struggling residents. Yeah, not too shabby of the Mafia, is it? Actually kind of nice. As Italy struggles to pull its economy through the coronavirus crisis, the Mafia is gaining local support by distributing free food to poor families in quarantine who've run out of cash, authorities have warned. In recent weeks, videos surfaced of known mafia gangs delivering essential goods to Italians hit hard by the coronavirus. Emergency across the poorest southern regions of Campania, Calabria, Sicily, and Puglia as tensions rise across the country. For over a month, shops, cafes, restaurants, and pubs have been closed. Nicola Grattieri, anti-mafia investigator and head of the prosecutor's office in Catanzaro, told The Guardian. Millions of people work in the gray economy, which means they haven't received any income in more than a month, and they have no idea when they'll be able to return back to work. The government is issuing a so-called shopping voucher. If the state doesn't step in soon to help these families, the mafia will provide its services, imposing their control over people's lives. The ramifications of the lockdown in Italy are affecting an estimated 3.3 million people in Italy who work off the books. Of those, more than 1 million live in the south, according to the most recent figures from the CGIA Mestre, a Venice-based small business association. There have been reports of small shop owners being pressured to give food for free, while police are patrolling supermarkets in some areas to stop thefts. Videos of people in Sicily protesting against the government's stalled response, or people beating their fists outside banks in Bari for a €50 loan, gone viral. And throwing fuel on the crisis, a fire the mafia is more than willing to stoke. From the first signals of mounting social unrest, the Italian Minister of the Interior, Luciana Lamorgese, said the mafia could take advantage of the rising poverty, swooping in to recruit people to its organization, or simply stepping in to distribute free food parcels of pasta, water, flour, and milk. In recent days, the police in Naples have intensified their presence in the poorest quarters of the city, where men tied to the Camorra, the Neapolitan mafia, have organized home delivery of food parcels. Magistrates have already begun investigation against a group of people who were questioned while distributing food to local residents. In Palermo, according to La Repubblica, the brother of a Cosa Nostra boss allegedly distributed food to the poor in Zen neighborhood, an area with an established mafia presence. When the news broke, the man defended himself on Facebook, claiming that he was only doing charitable work and attacking the journalist who first reported the news. Mafias are not just criminal organizations, Federico Versa, a professor of criminology at the University of Oxford, said. Organizations that aspire to govern territories, markets. Commenters often focus on the financial aspect of mafias, but they tend to forget that their strength comes from having a local base in which to operate. The question of distributing food parcels as a tactic is as old as the mafia itself, where in the south of Italy, bosses have customarily presented themselves to the people as benefactors and the local power brokers, initially without asking for anything in return. Mafia bosses consider their cities as their own fiefdom, Guterres said. The bosses know all too well that in order to govern, they need to take care of the people in their territory, and they do it by exploiting the situation to their advantage. In people's eyes, a boss who knocks on the door and offers a free food is a hero. And the boss who knows that he can then count on the support of these families when necessary, when, for example, the mafia sponsors a politician for election who will further their criminal interests. Dozens of investigations in the South have led to the arrests of politicians who have aided and abetted the mafia and who were elected with the support of local mafiosi who forced citizens to vote for them in exchange for their services, such as simple food parcel. These handouts by the mafia are not gifts. The mafia does not do anything out of its kind heart, Versailles said. They are favors that everyone will have to pay back in some form or another, by aiding and abetting a fugitive, holding a gun, dealing drugs, and the like. Consider what happened to El Chapo, the Mexican narco, said Guterres. He trafficked tons of cocaine and commissioned the murder of hundreds of people, but in his hometown, he was known for benevolence because people said that he provided medicines to families or built roads. Same thing happens here. This week, anti-mafia Italy prosecutor's office said the bonuses would offer their virtually endless criminal capital to businesses in need and then swallow them up. Then they will use those businesses for money laundering profits from the criminal activists. Versailles said the mafias might be able to benefit in other ways from the current lockdown, and especially in the future when Italians will be able to return to work, spending more money and getting the economy on its feet again. But surely the story, exemplified by the handouts of food parcels in Palmiero and Naples, shows their true nature and why they're so dangerous. Or maybe they're just good guys. What pessimists, am I right? Ugh. Anyway, we've basically come to the end of today's episode. So I'd like to thank you again for listening to me babble in my kind of slurry voice. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sorry. It is from the blood loss. It's not from others. I mean, it's Good Friday, isn't it? Hope you guys are going to have a good Easter anyway, even though you're going to be locked in. Make sure you're practicing social distancing, even though it is a holiday and long weekend. And you still have fun over Zoom with your friends and family. So thank you for listening to the Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and to write us a nice review. And if you could rate the episode, it'd be really helpful for us. Also, please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. Thanks again for listening. Stay safe, stay sanitized, stay inside, and have a great night. Talk to you soon.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.